I'm not sure. I sent her the link.
I probably got the blood. Yeah. Seems
I
like you're
think I
good.
should have it on the opposite side of the table.
Hear it now.
Chemically tested.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Dean, we're kind of still getting set here, so if we could give us just another minute or so, but you do have a quorum for the committee when we're ready. You're muted.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
What do you want to give it another couple of minutes, or you tell me when you think we want to go?
Yeah, give us just another minute or so.
Okay, that'll work.
Austin.
Okay, I think we're all set here on this ending.
Okay, I think guess we're ready to get started. We'd like to welcome everybody to our Aquifer Stabilization Committee meeting today. It's being held at the Water Center and on Zoom. I guess do we have all of our committee here?
You have, as far as committee members, you have Dean Stevenson, Al Barker, and Pat McMahon. And then other board members who are not part of the committee, you have Mark Gibbs, Dale Van Stone, and Joanne Cole-Hansen.
Okay. All right. I guess we're ready to start. I guess we'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Okay, first item on the agenda today, Mr. Chairman, is a report from Mike McVeigh on aquifer storage changes update on aquifer storage change. And I'll hand it over to Mike.
Let me share my screen real quick. All right, I think I'm ready. Members of the board, good afternoon. My name is Mike, as Brian said, and I'm here to talk about storage changes in the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer. Now, I'm sure that everybody in this room and on this meeting is intimately familiar with Southern Idaho and the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer, but I show the aquifer model boundary a lot during this presentation, so I just want to make sure we're all oriented. Excuse me. Pointer. So as you're going through this, you can kind of use the fingers on each side of the plane here on the north Arco, on the south here Pocatello. Idaho Falls up here in the northeast, and down here at the end where Thousand Springs discharges at Hagerman. If you do get lost and you need help, just let me know and we'll figure out where we're at. So aquifer water balance, deceptively simple equation, inflow minus outflow equals change in storage. But in fact, we spend a lot of time and money and effort trying to get at those ins and outs. And it takes time, I mean, a long time, more than a year. And we often wind up with estimates and very poor measurements. And so calculating storage change that way is really inefficient and doesn't allow us to understand what's happening or to make decisions. So we need a more efficient way to get at storage changes. And fortunately, we can just use water levels and cut right to the chase. And this should make sense, right? If there's more water in your well, there's probably more water in the aquifer and vice versa. So that's the relationship we're going to leverage. The calculation is pretty straightforward. I just take water level changes at each well where I have measurements, and I interpolate those changes across the model area. So now I've got a depth of change across the area of the model that gives me a volume. But unfortunately, that volume also contains aquifer matrix. So that means I need to introduce something called specific yield. A nerdy hydrogeology term. We can look at it in cartoons. You can see here, there's my rendition of the subsurface with unsaturated right below our feet, saturated aquifer below that. Pull out a piece of the aquifer, It's rock and water. And if we let that water drain by gravity, that's the water that's available to our wells, and that's the specific yield. So I multiply that by the volume I just calculated, and that's the volume of water. I've effectively removed that rock from the calculation. So these calculations take a lot of information. We base them on mass measurements, synoptic events you may have heard them called. And we go out and in a shorter period of time, we measure as many wells as we possibly can because we're looking for a snapshot in time. And we want to compare those snapshots over time. So in the past, as part of calibration for the E-span model, we performed these synoptics in 1980, 2001, 2002, and 2008. We're using these data a lot more now. So now we do it every 5 years, 13, 18, 23, and the next will be in 28. We like to do these measurements in the spring for several reasons, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to integrate everything that happened last year into kind of this resultant condition. Then we take our snapshot, and that's what we compare year after year. We want to go as long as we can because we want as much time as possible to allow that integration to occur, but we want to start before irrigation starts because we don't want to include irrigation practices this year. So it's a balancing act on when we choose these water levels. So another issue we have with these measurements is local water use. So here's an example of a well. You can imagine somebody turns on a well, we come and take a measurement shortly after, and the water level has changed a great deal. I'd come by with my calculation, interpolate across the plane, and get a volume of water that was released from volume. But in fact, it's probably only a well bore volume, excuse me, that was hard to say. And so we don't want to make these mistakes. And so what can we do? Well, we introduce the concept of transducers. When we say transducers in here, I think everybody understands we're talking about the transducer that takes the measurements as well as the data logger that keeps the measurements. And then we come in and download it when we can. Now, these are helpful in several reasons. One, of course, we're going to collect a lot more information, but importantly, we collect information when we can't get out there. Because remember, I want the springtime measurements, and a lot of the most important wells we have are in areas that are inaccessible during the springtime. And it just breaks my heart. I live and die by these water level measurements, and to see an important well not have our measurement on time, oh, it's killer. But with the transducer, we can keep measuring and come back in later in the summer when it's available, or we can get in there and grab that data. We'll still have it. It also allows me to understand what happens in this well over time, understand its behavior, and then see when something's happening that I don't want to collect. Some of those local water use issues is something I'm really trying to avoid. I think I put it up here. Yeah. And so, just adding to that, managed recharge could act like a local water use. We got to be really careful. I need to capture recharge. That's what we're after. That's what we want to understand. But if I'm not careful, I can really overplay it and make it look like we're doing a lot more than we actually are. So these transducers really help with that. And here's an example. This is well near milepost 31 recharge location. And it shows us several things. One, you can see my theory that I want to take this measurement as late as I can in the spring. You can see it happens in the past, right? Boom. Things happen, recedes, boom. Irrigation works out well. But now they start doing recharge. I can see, one, because I've transducer, things have changed. Two, I can see maybe the date that I would like to change isn't the right date. And three, I can see maybe it's being impacted too much and I don't want to use this well at all. This well is very close to milepost. I don't use this well because I was able to see the water level changes with our transducer. So let's look at some change maps based on that calculation I just described. We're going to see a lot of these. And so I want you to get us oriented here. At the top, I'm always going to show the years of comparison. Down here in the left middle, that's the calculated change in storage in acre feet. Note that the colors are the same between each figure. So all you have to do is look at the pretty picture and make a decision on what's happening. I don't want you thinking about this stuff. Then the dots on the map, those are the wells that I used for the calculation. And down here is how many wells I was able to use for that calculation. So 1980 to 2001, these are our first two mass measurements. I did this on a lark in my office one time, came and showed it to Brian and said, let me show this to the board. I showed it to the board and they were not happy. This is a very large number. Nobody had really thought of it in these terms, I think, and it was fairly shocking. I was actually a little worried. So they said, go back and do it again. I come back with 2002, now 1.9 million acre feet in 1 year. 2 million acre feet in about 20 years, 1.9 in 1 year. Again, shocking, again, scary. Keep going, see if it gets better. 2008, we're down 6 million acre feet. 2013, 7.5 million acre feet. The story is getting worse. Go to 18, hey, we crawled out of the abyss into a super deep hole, right? We had that good winter. We started doing managed recharge. We're climbing our way out of this. We go down to 23. There it is. And we're back down 9.3 million acre feet since 1980. So this is good information. It's telling a story. It's telling a bad story, but it's not really useful, right? You can't make management decisions with this. It's just something that makes us upset. So maybe we can do more, fill in the gaps. So in fact, we've always measured hundreds of wells on the plain every year, just as part of a long-term monitoring program. But that is just kind of a long-term monitoring program. You go out when you can get out. You know, if it's snowy, you come back a little later. If you're busy in your office, finish your work and get out there when you can. But we use these data a lot more than we used to. So now we've tightened up that window for sampling to match those larger mass measurements that I talked about earlier. So that way we're comparing things more directly over time. Excuse me. All right, so let's look at some of these annual maps. The color ramps are different on these maps than those previous maps, but they still go together with all these other annual maps. So you don't have to compare the colors in your head. Just let your eyes do the work. So 15 to 16, we like to start in 2015 because that's when a lot of things started. Active managed recharge started in 16, settlement agreement activity started in 16. So 2015 is a good place to start to kind of compare our intense management activities. So 15 to 16, we lost 300,000 acre feet in storage from the aquifer. It's an ugly number, but remember, that's pretty close to average. This is something you should get used to seeing, you know, on average. Kind of ugly, but it's the truth. Fortunately, we had Snowmageddon, winter of 16, 17. I was so happy. I come in to show the board, made 800,000 acre foot gain in storage. It was very unsatisfying. Everybody knew that was wrong. We had Snowmageddon. Where's all our water? But if you look at the map here, you can kind of see the northeast area is still red. The middle's still red. And what's happening is it was still wet and cold in that spring. So the water's kind of entrained in ice and snow and it hasn't been introduced to the aquifer yet. So move on to the next year. There's our big gain, 1.6 million acre feet. So this is a good time to interject that, hey, you know, none of this really happens in 1 year. A lot of this kind of smears out over time. So it's hard to remember that. We don't want to live and die by each of these numbers, but they're important to us, but they don't exactly represent one single year. Go down to the 18, 19. I have put down negative 30,000 acre feet just to put something here. I typically round to the nearest 100,000. However, when the numbers get this small, between 0 and 100,000, it just seems cruel. So when you look at this, I would just say we're kind of on the minus side of 0. You know, we kind of held steady, but it's Southern Idaho, so what do you expect? Then we move on to next year, 19 to 20. We gained 400,000 acre feet. 20 to 21, we lost it. 500,000 acre feet. Since 21, 22, 1.3 million acre feet. The bad story's back. We keep going down. 22, 23, a million acre feet. And then finally, 23 to 24, 800,000 acre feet. So this last year, we put 800,000 acre feet into storage. So that's a pretty good number. I was really happy with this. And look at all those wells we're using. I mean, as time goes along, we're using a lot more wells. I'll talk about that here in a second. Do I need to stop for anyone? Okay. Sentinel wells are important. These mean a lot to us. So I plot them on here too, so you can see how they're fitting with what's happening across the entire aquifer. I see some members looking at it, so I'll wait here a second.
Dean,
Okay,
this is, yeah, back to that one. It would appear that where the Sentinel wells are, may be telling us something. I know they're a surrogate for the reach gains, but that Sentinel well number probably doesn't match exactly the health of the aquifer that you showed us in the previous slide.
Was that Jeff? Mr. Raybould. Yeah, I think when I look through these things, it is kind of a mixed bag. I think on this one, it's mostly up. They tend to be about half and half when I look through a lot of these things. You know, you look through and half of them are kind of in a white or green area and half of them are kind of in a pinkish area. So I don't know how to assess if it's telling the full story. I don't deal with that index. So maybe that's just good observation.
That's just an observation I'm making. And it could be wrong. I
didn't hear the last part of that, Mr. Raybould.
I just said I could be wrong. I often am. So it's just an observation of where I see the blue dots and the color on the map. I only see one that's touching green. So I guess
Right.
two of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot
Thank
of that white is positive as well, but yeah, there isn't a
Okay.
lot of super green.
Okay, any more questions from committee members? So this is Dean. I have a question. So when you look at the numbers of change, is this based on model 2.2, or is some of the information that goes farther back based on earlier versions of the model?
No, was this Dean?
Yeah.
Mr. Stevenson. No, it's all based on ESPAM 2.2. The only thing that I use from ESPAM is the calibrated specific yield. And I just use the average value. It's not spatially distributed. And so each time I do this, when we change the model version, I update it by changing that specific yield. So these numbers are different than the first time I presented them.
Water level data themselves are actually.
Water level data is actual measurements taken at that time, yeah.
Okay. It looks to me like all of the green happens around the edges of the aquifer, and out in the middle, it's tough to make changes. Is that right?
I think it's more of a delay. We saw that in 16, 17. It all seems to hit the edges. You get the runoff from the mountains where they're getting more precipitation, and that stuff out in the middle, it's deep to water, and it just takes some time to get there. I've kind of noticed this phenomenon over time.
All right. Any other questions from committee members or other board members? All right.
All right, thank you. Good questions. So now we can kind of put this all together. I've been telling a long story. So if we look at this graph starting in 1912, the first half of this going up to 1980, USGS did the calculation doing the in minus out method. It's a lot of work and it took a lot of time. So then in 1980, we come in and we start doing the water level change method. So now those numbers that I gave you at the very beginning aren't floating in space. They've been connected by the dots in between and they tell a story. And I think that story is really helpful. We can see where we've been, tells us what we need to do, and it helps us understand maybe not where we're going, but what we've done in the recent past. So very helpful, I think, to put it all together. And we also like to plot this with the Thousand Springs discharge. And it's just helped to remind everyone that discharge in the aquifer is head-driven flow. If there's more water in the aquifer, there's also going to be more water coming out of the aquifer. And this illustrates that. In general, when water levels go up, so does discharge from the springs. It's not exactly the same, but remember, I'm calculating a change over the entire aquifer, not just there at the springs. And so they're more impacted by what's near the springs. So sometimes they get a little bit off step, but in general, they work out.
Dean,
I think Ethan's got.
Yeah. Dean, this is
Go ahead.
Jeff again. This is comparing it to the Thousand Springs discharge. Would it be possible to put a graph together like this that compared it to the reach gains between Blackfoot and either Neely or Blackfoot and Milner?
Mr. Raybould, yeah, it would be possible. Absolutely.
Because I'm just basing this on a comment I heard at the negotiating meeting yesterday when they said that somebody said the peak in reach gains between Blackfoot and Milner happened in the mid 80s, not back in the 50s or 60s. So it might be interesting to look at that correlation and see how that matches the storage level.
Dean and Jeff will have some info on those reach gains here in a few minutes when
Okay.
Ethan presents. But yeah, I think that we could take a shot at graphing those two things together and see what they look like.
Yeah, I'd just kind of like to know, because there was an insinuation that we were making all these decisions based on Thousand Springs, and what good does that do anybody? And maybe I misread the room yesterday, but that's kind of what I thought I heard.
No, I heard it yesterday as well.
Thank you.
All right. So we also like to do an intermediate change map. Again, we like to start in 2015 to give us a comparison. It's easier than adding, so we go ahead and make one picture. And since 2015, we've gained approximately 500,000 acre feet in aquifer storage. And then again, showing the Sentinel wells. And Mr. Raybould, I think this is where I was looking at, it seemed like about half and half. Half up and half down. Okay, and I mentioned earlier, I think this is a really important part of what we're doing, not just this, but a lot of the things we do on ESPAM or ESPA. And that's the number of wells that we monitor. Here's what we used in 2015-16. This is the calculation that I used, or the wells that I used for that calculation. And here are the wells in 23-24. And that to me is impressive. I think I've said it before, I'm kind of a nerd. That makes me smile. Sometimes at night when I can't fall asleep, I think of all the wells that we have on the ESPA. But what's really exciting is when we start throwing in the transducers. Now this is good data across the plane. We almost have full coverage. And I envision a day when we can just use transducers and things will be a lot smoother and a lot nicer. Yep. And then there's been a lot of discussion of this lately. I think it's important to note that I also get a lot of data from the USGS. I don't know if you can see that. I'll back up again and do it again. There you can see there by the big and little loss is where most of them are. And I just pull this off their public database, the WEMIS database. So that's how we get that data. So in summary, we gained about 800,000 acre feet in storage from 2023 to 2024. We've gained about 500,000 acre feet since 2015. And with that, I'll take questions.
Mr. Chairman, Mike,
Yep. Go ahead.
what is the recording time on the data loggers? How often do they report?
It varies. We do hourly up to twice a day is generally what we use.
And they just report it, they contain the data and you have to download it?
Correct. Yep. There are some telemetry wells where we have the transducer and it's hooked up where you can just send it directly to a website. And that's real time, but most of them we have to download and then.
Thank you.
Hey, Dean, Director Weaver's in the room here as well and had a question.
Just on that last comment about the USGS wells, is there a nexus between those USGS wells and the INL?
Nexus,
Are those on INL?
a lot of them are on INL. Back to it.
So there's a lot of interest in INL well data right now. Could you just speak maybe a minute or two about that data and if and how we use it?
The data that we use are collected by the USGS. And so I literally go and download it and I do the same thing that I do with the other wells. I look at last year's springtime measurement and I look at this year's springtime measurement. They usually do a monthly or every other month measurement on their wells. As far as I know, no INL radioactive wells or even INL collected data is reported to us. I use USGS reported data and they kind of act like they're hydrographer for a lot of the INL. Does that address your interest?
Perhaps my follow-up would be, is there INL well data out there?
I think there is INL well data out there. I know there was a recent meeting. I wasn't part of that meeting with INL. I don't know if you've got any more information on that, but. No.
So you use 125 of the wells,
So I download 130, use about 125.
use 156 for ESPAN calibration. And I think the INL wells would be shallow wells that they use for monitoring that we don't use.
Correct. But I don't know if you heard that.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I'll relay the message from the back of the room. I use about 130 wells. We use 158 wells, 156 for ESPAM calibration. Most of the INL wells that INL is monitoring for their purposes are usually shallower. We don't use that data. I preferentially filter that out because I'm looking for regional aquifer water levels. But I mean, they are on INL property, a great deal of them, but not all.
So Mike, this is Dean. Do you have areas where we need more information? Is there areas on the aquifer we need more monitoring wells?
Are you really asking me that?
Well, I know, yeah.
Just kidding.
But is there a
we are-
specific area that we don't have a lot of information? I know in the middle, we don't, but
Yeah, and a lot of those places, I don't think we'll get that information. We've got craters of the moon, we have access issues. And so a lot of that I don't think we need. Maybe in the far northeast that we could use a little bit more. But I think mostly transducers and telemeters where we're at now. I mean, we've got a nice suite across the plain now if we can get it automated and pick the best water levels. Because no matter how hard we try, somebody went out and picked a water level or chose a water level at the end of March, and I get the next one is 5th of April. It could be an issue and it could not be an issue. And that's just what we have to live with. But with those transducers, we can get away from a lot of that.
All right. Any more questions from committee members or board members? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, next presentation, we will have Ethan Geisler talk about ESPA spring discharge and reach gains.
Welcome, Ethan. Go ahead when you're ready.
All right. Let's see. Okay, I think we're good. So yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Ethan Geisler. I'm a hydrologist with the department, and I'm going to talk about aquifer discharge. So like Mike mentioned, this is well correlated to the storage change plots that he shows. So I'll get into it here. As Mike showed, this is the outline of the ESPAM boundary. You can see there we have some light gray contour lines, in addition to some generalized flow patterns that we see from those contour lines. And I'm going to focus on two areas today. The first is this near Blackfoot to Minidoka reach gain that Mr. Raybould discussed, as well as the springs down here in the Thousand Springs area. So I'll get into the first part here, the near Blackfoot to Minidoka reach gains. I have a couple slides on this. So to get into this, the reach gain is the gain or loss between beginning and end of a river reach. So in this case, it's the Minidoka gauge minus the near Blackfoot gauge. And so that's part of the calculation. Then we move into taking into account reservoirs. So the change in content plus the evaporation, we add that back in. We also add back in diversions into this reach gain. And then this is where this calculation starts to diverge from what you folks may be familiar with, the water right accounting reach gain. That reach gain includes the return flows and tributary flows, but this calculation removes return flows, mainly from the canals above the near Blackfoot gauge, so Peoples Canal and then the two Fort Hall canals, as well as the Aberdeen Springfield area. We monitor some return flows there. And we also remove out tributary flows. And so this is both from Rock Creek and Portneuf, and this allows us to get a better representation of what is coming out of the aquifer compared to what's available for natural flow. So this is for aquifer metrics rather than water right accounting. And so many of you are familiar with this graph. This is the one that Mr. Raybould was talking about. Just gonna move one thing here. Okay. And so you can see here, we've kind of bounced around over time. I think Jeff was mentioning the 1980s was when we had that peak. And then since then, we've been in somewhat of a decline. 2000s, we've kind of been bouncing around. And then more recently, we've been pretty low on the reach gain side. So we have annual reach gain here in millions of acre feet on the y-axis, just for reference. And then 1925 to 2023. We haven't finished the 2024 water year yet, so we'll present that next year. But the 2023 value is in between the last couple years. So that kind of matches what Mike was showing in the aquifer storage change plot. And so I would be interested to see this plotted against that. I think some of these early years may not match like Thousand Springs does, but it would be interesting to see what these years, how they match. So that's all I have on the reach gains for near Blackfoot to Minidoka. I'll take questions if we want on this before I move into the Thousand Springs area. If not, I can just move right into that and take questions at the end too.
Any questions from committee members? So I guess I have a question, and it does look like in the 70s and 80s that those reach gains peaked. Is that real, or is that just the previous reach gain numbers? We didn't have good data.
It could be a mixture of both. So those early data come from the old Snake River planning model, which is hard to track down documentation on. So it could be a combination of the two. So that's probably why it hasn't been plotted, just because that early data isn't, we're not as strong in that data side on that early data. That's a good point.
Any more questions from committee members? All right.
Okay, so I'll move into the southwest portion of the aquifer here, so the Thousand Springs area. So below Milner, from Milner here to about King Hill, here where my cursor is what we'll kind of focus on to start. So as you get below Milner, the river starts to incise through those basalt flows. And so you get springs that come out of the canyon walls, some springs seep into the river, and that makes it difficult to actually get an estimate of total spring discharge. And so this case here, as you see in this picture, this can be relatively easy to measure. It's channelized coming off this canyon wall. There's a road here. And so you can get a measurement pretty easy there and continuously monitor that site. There are instances, though, many instances where you can't measure the springs. So you have seepage coming out here. There's a lot of vegetation. There's no road access. So you boat in there and take measurements upstream and downstream of that site and try to do a mass balance to try to get at that. We also have other difficult sites where they just seep directly into the Snake River. This one may be able to be measured at low flow when the Snake is lower. But also there's no road access, so it makes it difficult to get in there. And so there's a calculation that was developed by the USGS in 1995. So we'll zoom into these springs and tributaries that are used in that calculation. And some of you may know that calculation is the Kellstrom calculation. And so it basically takes, to try to get a total spring discharge, it takes actual measurements that the USGS makes field visits in March and April at 17 of the springs. And then we apply statistic correlations to springs that we actually monitor continuously for the whole year. So some of these we're just taking individual measurements in March and April and then applying those statistics to. And that gets us a water year discharge. And so that's why we can have a 2024 value for this aquifer discharge metric. And so you can see here, this is what Mike showed, that storage change correlates pretty well to Thousand Springs. As he said, we do have some divergences throughout the period of record, but overall, I think this is around 40 or 50 CFS lower than last year. And that's roughly, that's not too far outside the uncertainty range. So it's matching relatively well. And this value in 2024 may change because we get more data in through August and September towards the end of the water year here. So that it may change slightly, but probably not a whole lot. So another thing to keep in mind with these Thousand Springs discharges, the near Murphy gauge. So the Water Resource Board has a minimum flow at that gauge. And so some of you are familiar with the AADF chart here that I'm showing. I'll walk those that aren't through this. So we have CFS here on the y-axis, calendar year on the x-axis, and the minimum flow values here in this box on the bottom. So 5,600 during the non-irrigation season, 3,900 during the irrigation season. And then we also plot some Snake River near Murphy gauge statistics, on this y-axis. So the green is the median of record from 1981 to 2023. The red is the minimum of record. So you can see we get pretty low here at certain times of the year. We also have the actual 2024 Murphy gauge flows in blue, as well as the Milner flows in gray here. And then this black line is the AADF, so the adjusted average daily flow. And the department runs this calculation to remove Idaho power storage operations to make sure we're in compliance with those minimum flow requirements. And so you can see here, flows were relatively low to that minimum of record early on, but as we got that spring runoff, you can see it bumped up quite a bit because of Milner flows. We also had some flow augmentation in addition to that spring runoff, as well as Idaho Power stored water. And so if you remove those Milner flows, though, this isn't the official calculation, but it's just good context for those Thousand Springs discharge, because this is what basically drives those flows without Milner. And so you can see here, we still had some of that spring runoff, but then as we got into that summer season, it gets pretty low to that minimum, and then we're slowly starting to come back up. So just good context for why those Thousand Springs discharges are important, especially for the Murphy gauge. Now I'm going to move into some continuously monitored sites, both by the department and by the USGS. So we're going to work our way, each one of these is a spring. And so we'll work our way upstream from Curran Tunnel all the way to Devil's Washbowl. And I'll show you an annual discharge bar chart, as well as maybe some daily values. So first one here is Curran Tunnel near Hagerman. Had some pretty high flows in the 90s, kind of bounced around here in the 2000s. One trend that you will see in all of these spring graphs, though, especially these bar charts, is an increase after 2017. So that makes sense. We had that big Snowmageddon year, and then a decrease since then. So 2023 was below 2022 values, and this is for the water year. So that's why we only have 2023. If we move upstream to CPAC, the CPAC sites, there's both ABC and Bridal Veil. Similar trends here. Increase after 2017, 2023 is lower than the previous year. Same for Bridal Veil. And then these are daily discharge values. And so I'll walk you through this plot. So discharge on the y-axis again, water year on the x-axis. That gray or bluish on the screen in here is kind of the range of our period of record. So for this gauge, it's 2011 to 2023. The dashed gray line here is the median of record. And then the darker gray line is last year's data. And then 2024 is this year's data. And so a trend that we kind of see in all of these, and I'll show these for some other springs as well. But early on, flows are matching 2023. But then as we move into the water year, flows actually, 2024 flows increase a little bit higher than 2023. So that may bode well for spring discharge in 2024. So we'll see how that shakes out on an annual time step. But overall, looking pretty good. This is Box Canyon. We use this gauge quite a bit for Surface Water Coalition methodology, as well as some other just proxy for the springs. And so you can see increase after 2017, decrease since then. 2023 was a little bit lower than 2022. But like I said, early on this 2024 water year, flows were similar to 2023, but now flows have started to slowly ramp up a little bit closer to that median. So we'll see where that plays out in 2024 annual value. Briggs Springs monitored by the USGS, same trend that we see in the other ones, and same trend that we see in Box Canyon for 2024. So increasing slightly above 2023 value. This is Blue Lake Spring near Twin Falls, same trend, up and then down, and then similar trend in 2024. So I think we're seeing a trend throughout the springs here, and hopefully that bodes well for the graphs we show next year. Devil's Washbowl, so the most upstream site that I'm going to show and finish with. This one's actually doing really well. We're going above the median. We were below the median early on, but 2024 values are actually above 2023 and the median. So gives you good context. As we move upstream, it seems to be getting a little bit better response from the springs in 2024. So just something to keep in mind. And with that, that's my presentation. I'll take questions on springs, Thousand Springs discharge, or near and Blackfoot to Minidoka reach gains.
Okay, committee members, other board members, any questions? Okay, this is Dean. I have a question. Let's go back up to the Blackfoot to Minidoka reach again.
Yep.
So in that reach, where's the bulk of the water I mean, where are the springs that, I guess, that come out? Where's most of the springs? Are they up on the upper end, or where does the bulk of it come out, I guess?
Yep, so the bulk of it comes out in those stream gauges. So it's underflow into the river. I'm not aware of many springs other than maybe up in here. There's some springs that are monitored. But within the calculation, that shows up in that stream gauge, stream flow value, where the bulk of it is coming from. Does that make sense? So it's not like Thousand Springs where you can see them coming out. This is more of like an underflow that comes in, and you can only tell by doing a calculation.
So do you think the bulk of those come in the reservoir?
Potentially, yeah. Yep, I would say so.
All right. But as far as below American Falls, it doesn't, probably the only gain there is probably return flows from MID.
Yeah, and we even take return flows out. So yeah, if you're talking about below Minidoka, a lot of those would be return flows on the water at accounting. If we were to run this down to Milner, we would take out those return flows though. So I think a lot of it is just underflow into the stream.
Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, there's no further questions. We can move on to a presentation from Alex Moody, one of the groundwater modelers here. And he'll show some information about the modeled impacts of aquifer recharge and groundwater conservation on the eastern Snake Plain Aquifer.
All right, thank you, Brian. I'm Alex Moody. As he said, I'm a groundwater modeler here at the department. And I'm gonna talk about some modeling I do, looking at impacts of aquifer management activities on the ESPA. First slide here, just a broad overview of what goes into the model. This is using eSPAM 2.2. I run 3 different scenarios through the model, seen here in the table. I look just at board recharge. I look at IGWA recharge. Lumped in with that is donated Surface Water Coalition storage, as well as cities recharge. And then I look at pumping reductions. So this is the annual volumes based on a calendar year. I have a little disclaimer here on the bottom. These won't match up necessarily with reported board volumes, as that runs August to July roughly. But these are calendar year. I'm just trying to give a sense of what's going into the model. For items like pumping reductions, this isn't IGWA total conservation. So there's a few items such as conversions that do not get modeled. With IGWA recharge, knowledge of timing and location varies. So I do have to make some assumptions in timing. Mainly the timing, the location is pretty well known for most of those sites. Pumping reductions, I only get one volume through our WMIS database. So those are distributed throughout the irrigation season evenly, where it could in reality happen during different times of the irrigation season. Board recharge, timing and location of that is well known. What does this look like on the model grid? So yet again, another eSPAM model boundary plot here, kind of with the lower and upper valleys delineated as we talk about them in the recharge program. And this is all recharge occurring from August 2023 to the end of this most recent recharge period. So this includes IGWA as well. The point of this plot is just to get a sense of where it goes in the model. You can see Milner down here, Milner Dam. So a majority of board recharge occurs in the lower valley. A lot of this up here is IGWA and private recharge. Looking at the pumping reduction scenario, this is happening across wells all across the plain. So it's a lot more distributed. Our volumes are a little smaller on a cell-by-cell basis. And there can be negative numbers in the case that there was not a reduction below the baseline year. This plot looks at inputs through time at the top, and then the bottom three are results. So I'll kind of step through these. The top is thousands of acre feet from each activity. Blue is board recharge, red is IGWA recharge, and purple is pumping reductions. This is a stacked plot. So, you know, the top value will be the sum of all of those components. You can get a sense of the timing of when recharge occurs for the board and for IGWA and when those pumping reductions occur. These are monthly time steps. That's how time is represented in the model. So we're not operating on daily. For the board recharge, I sum up these daily values and distribute it throughout the month. Plots 2 and 3, these are river gains from the aquifer in CFS. The colors are the same entities as I described them here, board, IGWA, and pumping reduction. I'm starting this in 2014. You can see here on the x-axis. You know, I do begin this in January 2014 and run it through the end of August 2024. So you can see even, you know, though we're doing board recharge in the lower valley, we do see gains up valley, so to speak. Gains below Milner, the board has by far the most impact below Milner in these reach gains. And then the cumulative storage, this is how much we are adding to aquifer storage from each of these activities. Again, this one is a stacked plot in million of acre feet. And I picked off some numbers for you at the end of the model run. Board activities have added 1.44 million acre feet to aquifer storage. IGWA recharge has added 0.3 million acre feet, so 300,000 acre feet. Pumping reductions have added 890,000 acre feet for a total of about 2.63 million acre feet. And I'm going to dive into the reach gains in a little more detail in the next few plots. But I can, if there's any questions on this one, I can take them.
Dean, this is Jeff. I'm looking at this top graph, and the blue color is board recharge. And it looks like from about 21 to 23, there wasn't very much. I'm looking at the scale on the side that says, so is that 100 a million? So it's just showing the like 120 to 130,000 that we did out of the Milner pool, and that was it. I'm just trying to get my scale oriented here.
Yeah, that's correct. And perhaps it helps to look at, you know, these are the volumes. So yeah, about, and this is calendar year, but those year about 134,000, 156,000.
Okay. All right. At first I read that as 100,000, but it's thousands. So so the 100 is really a million.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, moving into some little finer reaches. I'm still going to break it out, you know, below Milner, but I'll do above near Blackfoot and then look at that near Blackfoot to Minidoka reach that we saw in Ethan's presentation. So on the right, we're going to have the modeled impacts with two axes. We have acre feet per month on the left and CFS on the right. The colors remain the same for each activity, board, IGWA, and pumping reductions. And then I have an average seasonal volume table over here just to get a sense of what the volume returning to the river from aquifer recharge and pumping reductions is. So just looking at the aggregate, April through October, roughly the irrigation season, and that on average, we're doing 94,000 acre feet. And then in the winter, about 60,000 acre feet. I'm not doing the whole model run, just because I wanted to really capture kind of the full scale program when it's ramped up. So I want to start in 2018 to get a more realistic average that would reflect values today. Looking at near Blackfoot to Minidoka, I have this bullet point here, board impacts to reach steadily increasing. In the beginning, we're not contributing that much from board recharge, but as we continue on with the program, it's slowly increasing, and we're gonna see this in some videos I show with water level changes later on in the presentation. At the end of August, board recharge is contributing about 45 CFS acre feet. And all activities in general add about 56,000 acre feet to the reach in the irrigation season, and in winter about 37,000 acre feet. And now below Milner, as mentioned earlier, this is where most of the board impacts occur. We're looking at about 130 CFS at the end of the model run. This past year, we peaked about 8,000 acre feet this past month. And we're contributing 56,000 acre feet during the irrigation season and 33,000 acre feet during the winter. So I'm going to show some annualized volumes of the impacts. This is looking at the water year reach gains for each reach. This is to get a sense of where the gains are occurring for each management activity, kind of side by side, instead of having them parsed out into different reaches. The top plot, that's board recharge, middle IGWA, and then below is pumping reductions. With board recharge, the program started off smaller, but once we really got going and continued most recharge in the lower valley, you can see most reach gains are occurring below Milner, and generally, maybe a third in each reach near Blackfoot to Minidoka and above near Blackfoot. IGWA recharge occurs mainly at the upper valley, and you see it mainly returning to those upper reaches above Minidoka. And pumping reductions occur across the plain, but again, we're mainly impacting above near Blackfoot and near Blackfoot to Minidoka. And the next plot kind of it's showing the same thing but now as percentages. I think the most interesting thing to me on this was looking at board recharge percentages through these years. From 2020 to 2023, a majority is below Milner, but as we see those gains in near Blackfoot to Minidoka increase, that the share of impacts are increasing above Minidoka. You can see that in this past year, it was essentially 50-50 split between below and above Milner or above Minidoka. How much is remaining in storage? So this plot shows cumulative volumes recharged or conserved, in this case for pumping reductions, versus the amount that remains in storage. So at the end of the model run, that's what these bullet points are showing. About 56% of board recharge remains in storage, available for pumping or increasing reach gains. For IGWA recharge, we see about 29% remaining, and for pumping reductions, about 53% of impacts remain in storage.
This is Dean. I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Stevenson.
So IGWA's recharge and water board's recharge are done particularly in the upper valley and mostly the same places. Is the reason there's more water board still in storage is because of using the lower valley sites?
Mr. Stevenson, yeah, that's exactly right. We have better retention times in the lower valley. So that's why we see more remaining in storage from that or recharge occurring down there. Typically in the upper valley, it reaches the river a lot more quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Now we're gonna shift to looking at how the recharge activities, management activities affect the Sentinel well index. I've showed this in years past. It's kind of a busy plot, but we're looking at in the black line, that's the Sentinel well index. If we zoom in after 2010, this is where I introduce the model results. Each line again corresponds, the colors correspond to the same activities as they did in the past plots. And what I'm doing here is just subtracting off the modeled impacts from the Sentinel well index to ask the question, where would we have been without this specific activity? So start with the red line. That's without IGWA and city recharge along with the donated surface water coalition storage. That brings it down a little bit. And then the purple, that's without pumping reduction. So we're seeing, we saw that had more impact to the storage. So because we have more of an impact, removing and not doing pumping reductions would have brought that down even more than IGWA recharge. And then in this blue line, that's without board recharge. And then looking at the green line, that is all of those components added up. Where would we be without that? And that it's really stark to me looking at that, how this trend, it doesn't really change if we hadn't done anything. And so at the end of this, we're about 5 points or feet higher in the Sentinel well index due to all of the aquifer management.
Dean, this is Jeff. I've got a question. So is each of those components, pumping reductions, city recharge, board recharge, does that encompass each without board recharge and without the city recharge or pumping reductions? That's what the that's where the aquifer would be? Or is that if you had the city recharge and you had the pumping reductions, but you didn't have the board recharge, you would be at the blue line? Does that make sense?
That does, yes, that's a great question, and I'll clarify. So the red, purple, and blue lines, those are subtracted from the observed Sentinel well index. And then what is reflecting where we would be without all of those activities is the green line.
So if the only activity was without board recharge, that assumes without the other two as well? Or does that assume the other two happened and board recharge didn't?
That assumes the other two happened and board recharge did not.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll have some plots coming up that reverse the sense of that and look directly at storage instead of the Sentinel well index. So
thank you.
All right, now let's compare these changes in aquifer storage from the model to actual measured change in aquifer storage. This is the same plot Mike McVeigh showed about aquifer storage change. So we have the USGS water budget method and then Mike's water level method to get these. I'm going to zoom into this yellow area here for the most recent years and go through the same exercise that I did with Sentinel well index and look at aquifer storage. Okay, so the blue line, again, that's Mike's storage change calculation. This red line, I'm calling a simulated baseline. That is the modeled storage impacts subtracted from the observed storage impacts. So, where we would be without any aquifer management in terms of aquifer storage. And the next plot, I'm going to throw all the scenarios back on, all the results from the management activities, and we'll see what that looks at. So this is adding those results onto the red line in this case. So kind of in that vein, you can read these all as a cumulative thing. So they are stacked in this instance, which is different than the Suddenall well index. But we'll start with board recharge. Colors are a little different here. Board recharge is purple. So adding impacts to storage from board recharge. And then on top of that, then we include IGWA recharge. And that gets us almost back to observed water level changes, aquifer storage change, and then add pumping reductions. And we're back to what we see today. So notice this large delta between where we could have been without aquifer management in terms of aquifer storage to where we are today. So here I'm saying management activities moderate the decline in aquifer storage. I'm basing that off of, looking at we had this downward trend in aquifer storage previously, but now with management activity, adding aquifer storage in conjunction with even just good water years, we could think that maybe these 2 years, 17 and 18, all that aquifer storage was mainly from natural recharge, incidental recharge. But we can see here that activities are actually adding on to that benefit. All right, so if you've seen this presentation in the past, there's a movie section. I'm getting into that. What we're going to look at are two things. We have animations of the model results. So this is just water level changes due to each management activity as estimated by eSPAM. And then the last one, we're going to look at transducer data, not the exact same set of wells as Mike's. I think it's a subset, but we're going to look at observed water level changes since 2016, and then kind of go through an exercise of attributing that change to different activities. So we're going to start with board recharge. Again, this is water level change due to board recharge. It reflects that we're mainly doing this in the lower valley. So this scale here, every contour is about 2 feet. I do cut it off at 1/2 foot, positive and negative. In this case, it's just positive, just to get a sense of, you see this kind of front moving up valley. And that's why we're seeing impacts to streams, to near Blackfoot to Minidoka and above near Blackfoot. Oh, I think I moved into private recharge. Let me go back to the board. Sorry. I can't, there's board. So again, playing the board recharge, slow to start because there's a few months. I started in January 2014, so a few months without recharge. Yeah, and pay attention to this plume, and you can see it, water levels rising, down in that near Blackfoot to Minidoka reach. All right. This is IGWA recharge, cities recharge, and donated surface water coalition storage. It starts a little later, so a little bit of a lag. The scale is a little smaller here. We only go to 10 feet. It's occurring mainly in the upper valley. Again, I cut this off between 0.5 at 0.5 feet just to aid with the illustration. And then looking at pumping reductions. So a little more widespread throughout the valley. We do have some negatives in case where there was no pumping reduction. And that's where we are today. Okay, I'm going to move on to what we actually see in our data loggers. I'm going to skip through this movie because it's going to get repeated in the next one where I'm showing the attribution and the actually observed ones, but I just wanted to show this map so you could see these points are the wells that are used for this interpolation. It's not as rigorous as Mike's because this is mainly for demonstration purposes to get a sense of where water levels are at and how they're changing between Mike's water level change maps. But these are the wells I'm using. I'm not using the INL wells. I should get those next year from Mike, so I can't use that data to fill in a gap there. All right, so that being said, we'll have the observed water level changes on the left, and on the right, it's going to be a colorful plot showing a few different colors. When it's blue, the majority of that water level change has been due to board recharge. When it's pink, that's been to IGWA total mitigation, so that's pumping reductions and recharge. And then when it's yellow, that's natural and incidental recharge that are not accounted for in the models. I know Wesley's happy that I got this together. I am too. So it starts off mainly natural incidental recharge. Now we're in 2017. And you can start to see blue down in the lower valley. That's because the recharge is, at increasing storage and increasing water levels down there. Start to see more IGWA activity. That's the pink. Blue still down here. And in these wet water years, you'll notice more green. And the green is recharge working in conjunction with, those wet water years. In 2021, board recharge is really having an impact. These were dry years. You start seeing more blue move up gradient, up the valley. If you're looking at the observed water level changes here, you can see how the upper valley, these go from positive to negative a lot more quickly than down here where it's really retaining those high water levels, but things just return to the river more quickly in the upper valley. I can play that again if we want. If not, it's about 1.5 minutes, so I know it's a long video. So I'll continue on to my conclusions. There's a lot of takeaways from this, but just a few. Over half of board recharge impacts remain in storage. That number was about 56%. A seminal well index is 5 points higher with aquifer management. I say points, you could say feet, and 3 points just due to board recharge alone. And all management activities have increased aquifer storage by 2.6 million acre feet. And in my view, moderated aquifer storage decline. And it's kind of the sub point that, in wet years, we can take advantage of that. We're going to have more recharge naturally, but we can also take advantage of it by continuing the program in those years to really bolster aquifer storage. And that is all I have. So I'll open it up to any questions and can go back to any slides if you'd like to see them.
Any questions from board or committee members?
Dean, this is Jeff. I got a question about that last bullet in bold. Management has increased the aquifer by 2.63 million acre feet. Is that above what it would have been without management? Because I think that's a different number than what Mike showed us.
Correct, Mr. Raybould. Was it Mr. Raybould?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Mike's was 500,000 acre feet, I believe, from 2015. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
In the past year, that was just 800,000 acre feet, but that's the year-to-year change.
Right, but that's what I was thinking. It was a 500,000 acre feet, and you've got 2.6. So what? Overall, the aquifer is up 500,000 acre feet, but it would be 2.6 million less than that if not, but for the management regime.
Correct, and you can see that in this plot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that 500,000, I think he does that from 2015 to present day. So that 500,000 would be the difference between this point here and here, whereas I'm talking about the difference between what we observe and then subtracting out all those modeled aquifer storage impacts to get down to that, which is, hypothesized where, where it would be without.
I just wanted to clarify that, at least in my own mind.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay.
Okay, there's no further questions for Alex. We will move on to a report on the Raft River hydrogeologic and water budget analysis. And Mike, were you going to introduce Alexis?
Yes.
I don't think Alexis has presented to the board in the past, so I'll let you introduce her.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to introduce Alexis Clark, Idaho Geologic Survey. You may remember that she conducted the water budget for the Big Lost hydrologic investigation. And today she's going to talk about what she did for the board-funded Raft River hydrologic investigation, where she did both the water budget and the geologic framework.
Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. My name again is Alexis Clark, and I'm a hydrogeologist with the Idaho Geological Survey, or IGS. Today, I'm going to present the findings of a recently completed hydrogeologic investigation of the Raft River Basin. The IGS, as part of a broader investigation effort and as a non-regulatory state agency, has prepared a hydrogeologic framework and a groundwater budget. Before I get started, though, I just want to first thank the board for funding this work, and also to the IDWR for their contributions and support in this project. The Raft River Basin basically supports the communities and agriculture that rely upon surface water and groundwater resources. Much of the water use in the basin is for irrigation of crops, predominantly alfalfa and other grain crops are grown. Surface water supply is very limited in the basin, and most diversions take place at higher elevations in the system. And so this creates greater dependence and reliance upon groundwater resources throughout much of the basin, particularly in the lower part of the Raft River Valley. Nearly 100% of irrigation comes for groundwater supply. Additionally, the southern part of the basin also includes a geothermal resource. This is the state's only commercially operated power facility that's geothermally operated, that was brought online in 2008 and draws from a deeper aquifer that's separate from the shallow aquifer that's used for groundwater supply. And so the culmination of these resources are really rooted in a complex geology that's present in the basin, and that has implications for the overall availability of groundwater resources and groundwater occurrence throughout the basin.
Alexis, are you gonna address the depth to the two different mountains?
I can talk about that for sure. Yep. So the Raft River Basin is tributary to the ESPA. For reference. Just show, see if I can turn on a pointer here. Sorry.
Control L.
Control L, thank you. Oops. Adjusted, there we go. Thank you. As back up to the previous slide, there we are. So as part of this investigation, it's important to kind of look at the context. The Raft River Basin is tributary to the ESPA. I show here for reference the outline of the ESPA numerical groundwater flow model boundary. This basin represents over 1,500 square miles and includes parts of Cassia, Power, and Oneida counties in south central Idaho and part of Box Elder County in northern Utah. This basin received the state's first designation as a critical groundwater area back in 1963, and that's represented by this red outline here that actually comprises most of the Raft River Valley. I also show on this map administrative areas, including surface water and groundwater districts that are operated in Idaho, and also a water use area 11 in Utah. There are several motivating factors or drivers for this work, which include long-term concerns that have been raised about groundwater availability. There have been long-term groundwater level declines over several decades, predominantly in the central and northern parts of the basin, which have ultimately led to well deepening and land subsidence effects. This is present based upon building cracking and foundations in the Malta vicinity. Also, there's been decreased stream flow over time, and water quality TMDLs or total maximum daily loads that have been established for certain streams in the basin, and this is for temperature and nutrient considerations. The IGS has conducted this investigation at a watershed scale, including parts of Idaho and Utah, and we've done this in a phased approach. The first phase has involved data compilation and review, a data gaps assessment, and then also support for IDWR-led field investigation and data collection, including the installation of new monitoring wells and new stream gauges as part of this broader work. This phase 2, included the preparation of a hydrogeologic framework and a groundwater budget, which I'll talk about during the rest of this presentation. And additionally, IGS has prepared a summary report of our findings. I have a link at the end of the slide that will share that link. And there's some additional supporting electronic materials that go along with that report that will be made available on our website next week. Just to provide some context, this slide shows typical groundwater level responses in wells that IDWR monitors in the northern part of the basin. This part of the basin in particular has experienced some of the greatest groundwater level declines over the period of record, averaging between about 1 to 3 feet per year. For reference, I show here the study boundary to the north in yellow. The critical groundwater area boundary is shown as this red outline. And then the wells represented in yellow had available groundwater level measurements that coincided with the period of our investigation through 2021 that I'll talk about, but it doesn't show or convey the additional monitoring wells that IDWR has installed in 2022 as part of this investigation. And so a lot of these wells have fairly long-term level of data sets dating back to the 1950s and 60s in some cases. These hydrographs are a little bit hard to see at this scale, but essentially groundwater elevations are shown on the left, and the depth of groundwater is shown in the right in units of feet. And then well measurements reflect typically springtime conditions, March and April trends over the period of record. And so I think the important thing to look at and note here is that we see pretty consistent trends in terms of declining groundwater levels in this part of system over a long period of time. And I'll switch gears and talk a little bit about the hydrogeologic framework, and I can kind of speak to the different depth intervals and the relation between a shallow aquifer and the deeper aquifer that I mentioned to address the questions. This hydrogeologic framework included looking at a representation of the geology. This is a simplified geologic map that I show here for context of the study area, and I don't expect everyone to digest the individual hydrogeologic units that are referred to, but instead I'll just talk more kind of broadly about what the basin's geology conveys. This basin is at the intersection of really three geologic provinces, including the Eastern Snake River Plain to the north as you get from the transition from the Raft River Basin to the ESPA. We also see basin and range expressed with the bounding mountain ranges to the east, west, and southern margins of the basin, in addition to metamorphic core complexes in the southern part of the basin. This basin is really interesting because it represents some of the oldest rocks exposed in Idaho and Utah, ranging from Precambrian over 2.5 billion years in age to more recent exposures. The shallow aquifer that's used for water supply that typically draws from depths usually in less than 500 feet range for most cases, but there are some production wells excuse me, in the northern part of the basin that tap to 1,000 to 1,200 feet in depth. This shallow aquifer mostly is comprised of the Raft River and Salt Lake formations that consist of unconsolidated deposits, so clay, silt, sands, and gravels. And these tend to be interspersed with more consolidated units. That is the volcanic units and sedimentary package. And a lot of that aquifer material is conveyed by the yellow colors shown here, and kind of this peach tone to the north comprises most of the aquifer extent. Additionally, some deeper wells, particularly those used for production, tap into basalt units in the northern part of the basin as we get into that transition into the ESPA out of the Raft River Basin. And as I mentioned, that deeper geothermal resource that is expressed in the geothermal area, this particular map doesn't show that location, but it's in the south central part of the basin as we kind of have this transition of the Raft River starting to go towards the north. And then that resource taps into Precambrian elbow quartzite, and some of those wells are about 6,500 feet in depth, so an entirely separate aquifer system. But temperatures range up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit as an overview. As part of the hydrogeologic framework, the IGS prepared a geological model that was developed through available well drillers reports. These come from IDWRs and IGS databases, and were assembled from over 1,000 available lithologic logs and well completion details. This was developed into a fully three-dimensional model of the aquifer, and from which we derived 16 separate geologic cross sections. So this map shows all of the wells that were used to support the model, in addition to those cross sections. And we are also, as an aside, making these associated model files available on the IGS webpage. And so those will be available sometime next week. I won't go through all of the sections, but we'll share with you on the upcoming slide a section so you get an idea of what that model looks like. But in general, it spans from right around here where I'm pointing at that transition between the basalt and the sedimentary units down towards the Malta vicinity in this north-south transect. And so this just shows an example of what one of those cross sections looks like. So this is essentially a slice or a panel taken through that fully three-dimensional model. There's a lot of information on this particular figure, and it's a little bit compressed. So I'm just going to call attention to some of the main points. This panel is this cross section generally from north in this basalt vicinity to the south that's representing the Malta area, and wells that fall within this plane are plotted and are shown with their well IDs. And because this is a three-dimensional model, so we have lithology that's going to project to this section somehow within the plane. And so in general, we see a transition here from basalt. These are generally represented by the orange colors. As we get into more of a sedimentary package, these are clays, tend to be represented in blue hues. And then we get into coarser deposits as we get more into the central part of the basin, closer to Malta, represented by the orange, the yellow kind of hues here. A few key points, I think, to point out about this particular section. This is pretty typical of a lot of the sections that we see about the geology in this basin and in this model, in that you can see there's a lot of interfingering between coarse and fine-grained deposits, and that actually has implications based upon that assemblage, particularly for subsidence effects and due to long-term declining groundwater level trends. So I'm going to transition now, if there's no questions about the framework, and spend the next few slides talking about the groundwater budget. So the groundwater budget is going to be summarized on this slide. I talk about the components, and I'll talk about the residuals. A budget is just essentially a high-level numerical or an accounting, if you will, that's separate from a numerical model. It's an accounting of all of the inflows into an aquifer as recharge and outflows from the aquifer as discharge. This particular budget looked at a 22-year period spanning from 2000 to 2021 on an annual basis. And that time frame was selected to represent really average wet and dry year conditions that represent the climatic and water use patterns typical in this basin. And so I'll call out some few points. This particular image just shows a chart, and on the next slide, I'll show a table with the numbers, but I'll just kind of go through an overview of these components. And so in general, the components of the budget are represented as bars on this chart in acre feet per year over calendar years within the study period. And so inflows into the budget plot as positive, and those are above this zero line here. Inflows into the budget were considered for tributary canyon underflow as this purple bar that represents the amount of water that's coming from those surrounding mountain ranges and refilling or recharging the aquifer. And that is about 45% of the total recharge to the system. The lighter green bars also represent applied irrigation recharge. This is irrigation that's applied to crops that doesn't otherwise get consumed, and that is about 35% of the total recharge over the budget. And then the dark green bars represent aerial recharge that takes place on non-irrigated lands and on rangelands, in addition to irrigated lands during the winter months, as the remainder, about 20% of that total recharge. Outflows from the system are represented as the orange bars, and that comes entirely in the budget from groundwater that's extracted for irrigation of crops. That plots as negative below this zero line. And I'll talk about the residual. It represents inflows minus outflows. And how we kind of get there in terms of interpreting this plot and these numbers is that the sum of the purple and green bars represents the inflows, and then that gets subtracted, that is subtracted from the outflows representing the groundwater extraction from the system. as the orange bar. And so that's how we arrive at the points on this chart. And then essentially we can connect each of those points for the years within the study period to show kind of what those trends look like. I think an important point to really be aware of about this chart is that those values are negative in all of the years in the study period. And this line that is dashed represents the mean about negative 109,000 acre feet per year. So we have, in terms of recharge, that mean was about 58,000 acre feet per year. And the mean for the outflow based upon groundwater extraction was about 166,000 acre feet per year. So the take-home message on this is that that residual is highly negative in all years coming out of this budget. I'll talk about these numbers in table format. So this is a table of the groundwater budget components that I just referred to, in addition to estimated aquifer storage change annually, and then that estimate of outflow to the ESPA. This table shows values in terms of the mean over the period considered, and I want to call attention to kind of the right side of the chart. This just summarizes those recharge components for the three terms that I described in addition to the discharge. So tributary canyon underflow accounted for a little over 25,000 acre feet per year. Applied irrigation recharge was about 20,000 acre feet per year on average. And then aerial recharge was a little over 12,000 acre feet per year. And so when those are added together, we get this left column for total inflows into the system just under 58,000 acre feet per year. And then subtracting that total outflow of about 166,000 acre feet per year gives that residual mean of negative 109,000 acre feet per year. And so I want to kind of draw attention now to how the residual was used in addition to the change in aquifer storage to derive an estimate of groundwater underflow leaving the basin. And so that involves a storage change determination that is kind of similar approach to what Mike McVeigh conveyed today for the ESPA that was used. This number was taken from available groundwater flow groundwater level measurements rather at available monitoring wells within IDWR's network. However, this lacked complete spatial coverage over the entire aquifer, so it's a partial aquifer estimate. During this period of the water budget from 2000 to 2021, we didn't have the additional monitoring wells installed, importantly, to the north of the critical groundwater area to the edge of the Raft River Basin. So we're missing some areas that have groundwater extraction that is occurring. That's not part of this estimate. Additionally, there were a few years or a couple of years that were missing information. So this is temporally a partial estimate and represents the period from 2000 to 2019. But taken all together during that period over a partial aquifer change was negative, about negative 15,000 acre feet per year. And so the groundwater flow estimate exiting the basin is taken as the residual minus that partial aquifer storage change to arrive at about 94,000 negative acre feet per year. So a very large number, but a highly uncertain number that should be underscored and that can be addressed, as I'll talk about in the next upcoming slides, through additional data collection and through future numerical groundwater flow modeling. But this number represents uncertainty in terms of tributary canyon underflow, which typically has very low limited data available, gives higher uncertainty in that number, and then underscores uncertainty associated with that storage number for the reasons that I mentioned. This also, yeah.
Having a hard time grasping how we got 166,000 acre feet withdrawn for irrigation, but we only have lost 15,000, it would be to the storage of the aquifer when we really don't have huge amounts of recharge. Seems like that number, that 15,000 number seems like it's awfully low, given the amount of water being withdrawn and the amount being recharged.
That's a good question and a good point. This number reflects an estimate based on the specific yield, similar to the calculation that's done for the ESPA. I assumed a value advanced in this budgetary estimate of 0.05. So that has a large impact. And I also looked at a sensitivity range about that number. It's a very uncertain number. It could be either higher or lower, but we don't have the data to really constrain that. My report kind of addresses looking at that potential range, which could be much, much lower for a storage range of 0.001, for example, which would be on the really far end of what we would consider a unconfined aquifer condition, and then starting to get into a confined aquifer condition. Conversely, we can come up with a much higher storage change estimate if that specific yield term was a little bit bigger, for example, 0.1. So that puts that storage change, a bit more negative, higher looking at that. So there's a lot of sensitivity in terms of just moving a decimal place in terms of that storage change and the implications. I think part of what's going on in this basin as well is there's some subsidence effects, which are, permanent, basically compression of parts of the aquifer that you can't really get back as well. So I think that's kind of a factor going on. But I think, to your point, these numbers are really intended to kind of be high level budget estimates. And I think that we should be able to probably better have an understanding of the impacts of the storage change and those ramifications and some of these parameters in a numerical model, kind of coupled with additional data collection. So I don't know if that helps answer that question, to put it in context. It's a big number and very uncertain.
Dean, this is Jeff.
Yes, go ahead.
I think to ask Al's question another way, or maybe answer it, is even though the usage is 108,000 greater than the inflow, only 15 of that is a loss to the Raft River aquifer. The other 94,000 is a loss to the ESPA, because that's water that otherwise would have flowed to the ESPA. Whether these numbers are as accurate as they could be or not, I'm not disputing that. But the reason the raft only went down 15,000 is because 94,000 that would have gone to the ESPA got pumped out.
Yeah, so Mr. Raybould, yeah.
Okay, I guess I misunderstood the 94. I thought that was indicating that that 94,000 was in fact going to the ESPA, but that
It is actually a gradient reversal, and that's something that I should really underscore as well, that these negative values represent that gradient has actually reversed. So the direction is from the north to the south now into the Raft River Basin, and that's something that has been indicated in this budget for really all.
So basically the raft is capturing part of the ESPA that it didn't used to capture, is what you're saying.
This study looked from 2000 to 2001, but based on prior investigations, it looked like that it was a positive value for the raft into the ESPA, but that has since had a gradient reversal, and it's also supported through monitoring well data sets, groundwater level data sets as part of this study, but also importantly, the new monitoring wells that have been installed recently, just specifically in that area in the northern part of the basin.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank
So
you,
I have a
Jeff. too.
question. So two of them, one of them is, how far would that, I mean, there's water that wouldn't be, but the reversal of the gradient going back, that obviously wouldn't go through the whole aquifer, but how far south would that gradient reversal go?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think a good point that I don't think the expectation is that the hydraulic gradient reversal is over the entire basin. Certainly the northern part, I think there's, evidence for that. I guess I'd kind of address that in a couple ways. One is that this available monitoring well network was greatly expanded as part of this investigation. So there's been, 12 new wells installed, 11 of which, are brought online that have pressure transducer data, importantly, some wells in the northern part of the basin. So we'll have some hard data to kind of evaluate that going forward, and just in terms of that spatial distribution of where that occurs. I also think that just the resolution of this model, this water budget was rather at a water district level. So it's pretty coarse estimate. So I don't think I could really look at that and say definitively how far kind of back into the Raft River Basin that this is expressed. And again, I think that's something that a numerical flow model would be, a lot more adept at teasing that out and addressing.
So if you could go back a couple of slides, I guess I'll tell you when. Now go forward one. Go back forward. Stop right there. So the applied irrigation recharge, is that number the irrigation from the surface systems that are there, the leakage from those systems? Or how are you coming up with that number?
Right. So that represents both surface water diversions and the groundwater pumping combined that's applied for irrigation of crops. And so it's determined by basically looking at the combination of those diversions for surface water and the total pumping from groundwater, and then subtracting that from the crop irrigation requirements. So there's a crop irrigation requirement or a CIR calculation that goes forward, but then estimated and measured volumes of surface water and groundwater extraction, accounting for both. And so it's really intended to look at how much of that water that's applied basically makes it below the root zone for particular crops and available for recharge assuming that it recharges the aquifer.
Thank you.
Dean, this is Jeff again. If I could ask, what is that reversal of gradient in feet? I mean, how much would the Raft aquifer have to recover to be stable and level with the ESPA, so the ESPA did not drain into the Raft? How big of a problem is that? And I assume as we raise the ESPA, that compounds the problem of how much water is exiting the ESPA and flowing back into the Raft.
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point. I don't think that this study was equipped enough to kind of, I think, get at that point in terms of a volume. I think just because of the error bars, in terms of the uncertainty with these parameters, I'm not sure that this is really that tool. I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, today, but I think that it's a first step in that process, and I'll kind of address some of what I kind of see as the next steps in consultation with the IDWR. I think that may get at that answer a little bit better.
Okay, thank you. I don't want all the answers today. What would we have to do tomorrow? We'll be fine.
Sure.
So any more questions from board or committee members?
Mr. Stevenson, this is Mike McVeigh.
Yes. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to Alexis's answer to Mr. Barker's question about the storage being kind of small. She talked about the uncertainty with some of the parameters she uses to estimate that, but also remember what she said at the very beginning, that she didn't have full well coverage. And in particular, she doesn't have full well coverage in some of the worst parts of the drawdown. And so very likely, when we're able to better estimate storage, it won't be quite that small. I think it's important to realize that we're collecting that data right now. And as far as the gradient reversal, we have done a little bit of work towards that at IDWR. That may be a continuation on our part. We're not quite there yet, but we're definitely looking at that as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mike a question, we're going to save that to have you come back up. But the question is, we've been looking at the impact of all the rest of the withdrawals on the SPA, but it doesn't look like what Alexis has been studying has been incorporated into the analysis of where the shortfall in the ESPA is coming from. So is that something now that we're going to try and link those studies up together?
Mr. Barker, yes, absolutely. That's the objective. That's the main objective. The water resources in this area are really important and they're kind of hammered right at the moment. So yeah, the linkage is there. The E-span model right now, we're using studies from that 50+ years ago where water was discharging into the ESPA. And so this next calibration, we need to incorporate this new information that allows water to come in and out of the Raft River instead of just a one-way street. So definitely this is on the horizon.
Any more questions before? Okay. So I guess in terms of the key findings then from this investigation, if there's no more questions on any of the material, I think that the complex geologic conditions have real implications for both groundwater occurrence and the availability of groundwater resources in the Raft River Basin. We've seen that there's been a long-term declining groundwater level trend that's really concentrated within and to the north of the sea critical groundwater area. Some of that will be addressed through the new installation of monitoring wells that are integrated into IDWR's monitoring well network. We see that this kind of culminates in limited available groundwater resources, particularly in that central and northern part of the Raft River Valley. And that this residual reflects a mean negative in all of the study years. And we've kind of talked about that hydraulic gradient reversal, importantly in the northern part of the basin, that should be further evaluated by future studies. This basin or this budget estimate also generated an average estimated consumptive irrigation requirement on all irrigated lands of about 2 acre-feet per acre throughout most of the basin. And so I think this work is, preliminary first step in terms of the hydrogeologic framework and the groundwater budget. I think it's important to acknowledge not only the way that this study may be used, but also to point out some key limitations and how that funnels into suggestions for the next steps for IDWR. So in terms of the uses, this work is really intended to assist water resources managers and water users, including the development of a future numerical groundwater flow model and managed aquifer recharge. Importantly, limitations include this high uncertainty in certain budget terms, primarily the estimates of tributary canyon underflow with limited data. We've seen the limitations in terms of available data and what that looks like in terms of storage change and ultimately outflow estimates to the ESPA. And so ultimately that net change of storage may be higher or lower than what it's estimated here. And so in terms of kind of that coupling of the next steps are to make a recommendation or suggestion rather for continued data collection to continue to reduce that uncertainty and undertake numerical groundwater flow modeling to reduce and address uncertainty as well. And so I'd like to answer any additional questions and just want to thank everyone for their interest and time and support in this project. My contact information is provided here and our summary report is available on our website link shown here as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Well. Go ahead.
So Alexis, one question is with the information that you've gathered on the irrigation supply and drawdown of the reservoir or the groundwater, is there any indication or do you have enough information to even guess about whether or not that drawdown is having an effect on the geothermal resources in the deeper aquifer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not at this time. We don't indicate that there's been impact of those resources. The DOE and the USGS did some studies, I think dating back to the 1970s and 80s, that kind of looked at the potential for interaction for that. It's interesting that we do see in the vicinity of the geothermal resource areas, some of the IDWR monitoring wells do show increased water levels over time that are a little bit coincident with the time when the geothermal resource was brought online. But that resource is basically extracting from that deeper aquifer and then re-injecting back in the deep aquifer as well to maintain that pressure on that system. And so I don't believe that I've seen reports or information coming out that suggests that.
Any more questions from board members or committee members? All right, Alexis, thank you for coming and presenting. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, no further questions for Alexis on the Raft River study. Wesley would like a few minutes to discuss recharge conveyance contracts.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, members of the board, I will do my absolute best to keep this brief. As a brief summary from the memo that I provided, so with conveyance contracts, the resolutions that control those, the Upper Valley one was originally passed in 2016, and the Lower Valley one was passed in 2019. The Upper Valley resolution specifically states they're limited to 1-year contracts. In the Lower Valley, those can go for 5 years, and we are now at that point where those contracts are coming due. And so staff know that given how, the things we've learned from the operations of the program, we knew there was things that we wanted to tweak in it. And we talked to various canal partners, both in the Upper and the Lower Valley. And what we came up with, there's 2 kind of major points. The first is the payment structure in the Upper Valley and the Lower Valley are completely different. And in the brief analysis that we've done, it's like, it would definitely be a lot easier for staff if we could just kind of flatten that out to have one system for both Upper and Lower. We started looking at a couple different alternatives there. The second thing that came up was in talking with some of the operators out there, they would really like us to look at, is there a way of annualizing our payments? So for right now, and I think this is especially the case in the Upper Valley, but I suspect it's also true in the Lower Valley, is you can go some years with no recharge, and then we have a big year and there's a lot of recharge. Well, what that also means for them is then they have a large influx of money. And since a lot of these are nonprofits, that kind of presents a problem. And it'd also be helpful if there was a way of annualizing these payments so they could better budget like what they want to do. The long and short of it is that for us to work that out and come up with some ideas and then get the committee's input, the board's input, is going to take us a little time. So the plan in moving forward is that we're going to do 1-year contracts, have to do those in the Upper, but also do it in the Lower, keeping our current conditions. So that will get us through this next year, because potentially the next recharge is rapidly approaching, especially if there's any storage water for us to recharge. So the initial plan is, as long as the committee's okay with it, is to do these 1-year contracts, and then we'll come back to the committee with a plan of a new payment structure, etc. And so what I'm looking for here is, one, I just want to make sure that the committee's okay with the plan of moving forward for this next year. And second is if there's any thoughts about the stuff I mentioned of things they want us to look at as far as the payment structures, we would definitely be very interested in having that input. So for that, that's all that I have. Would just stand for any questions or any guidance that the committee might have.
Any comments from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Go ahead.
Wes, is the problem with the big influx of cash, the situation where a nonprofit has a certain percentage of income that it's allowed to get from an outside source that's not from its member, and it somehow jeopardizes its nonprofit status? Is that their concern?
That is correct, yes.
So it's going to be challenging to come up with a way to annualize payments over time when, you know, you might have 2 or 3 really good years, and then you might have 8 years where you got nothing coming in. And so I hope that doesn't happen, but good luck.
Thank you very much. I do realize that's
Mr.
partly.
Chairman,
Go ahead, Jeff.
you know, Al, I don't think it's going to be that complicated. I think you either come up with a 3, 5, or 7-year rolling averages. I think we need to run some different scenarios. As the total amount of recharge that is being completed, adjust those averages, then the payment would adjust. It wouldn't just be a flat payment for a period of time. That payment would have to adjust from year to year, but the fluctuations would be far less dramatic than they are under our current program, where you get a big slug of money in 1 year and then you don't get any for 2 years or whatever the time frame is.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Jeff, I think the other issue we've got is that depending on where you want to target the recharge for a particular year, you may end up with putting water in one canal 1 year, and then you want to keep putting it in that particular location as opposed to other locations. So if you go back in time and say what happened over the last 3 years, that may not be what we want to do going forward. So, but if we do it on a projection in the future, that might be a better way to do it. Wes,
That could be.
It's a challenge.
Right now, I think our bigger problem is getting as much recharge done as we can. Now, in years when we have a limited amount of water, and this would typically be a lower valley problem, not an upper valley problem, then we would have to figure out how to do that. I'm not saying it would be easy. I just think it would be easier for our partners to manage their cash flow. And I also think there would be some plus for us being able to budget and have an idea that we're going to have a fairly regular wheeling cost that we budget every year.
So I'm going to speak out loud for a second, Jeff. Remember what we did in the wood, where we said we'll give you some money up front for recharge, and at the end of a certain period of time, you've got to have matched that. And so maybe that's how you do it. If you're,
yeah, I think at some time there has to be a true up. I mean, I don't
Right.
think you just keep writing checks perpetually. If it's getting way out of whack, then you have to make an adjustment, or maybe you have to cut off payments for a year or something. But I don't, the way we're doing it now, I think is causing some undue hardship on our recharge partners.
yeah, and I think that's what we did in the wood, is we had that true up at the end saying you're going to get a certain amount every year, but by the end of that time, you got to spend that money on something other than recharge.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's ways to do that. You can either look at it going forward or look at it back. You know, this is how much you earned this time. I don't want it all now. Let me take it over time or something like that. I think there's things we can figure out. Okay, any more
Right.
discussion on that issue?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think what staff would appreciate today is a recommendation from this committee to the full board to move forward with 1-year contract extensions on our recharge conveyance contracts for this coming winter, while we work out these details that we've just been talking about.
Mr. Chairman, I will make that motion.
It's Jeff, I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate the input.
Okay, is there any other issues, any other items, any of the either committee or board members would like to bring up at this time? We've been here 2 hours, so I suspect the answer is no.
Can I move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman?
So moved. Thank you. Thank you, committee and presenters. Appreciate the time we've taken today to do this.
Well, it's been a good meeting, lots of good information. We just got to figure out how to capitalize on it. Thank you, Dean, and everyone else.
Thanks for letting me join. This is Mark.